The wind howled across the plains of New Mexico, tossing dry bushes and lifting dust that scraped the skin and hid the face. The moon peeked through the clouds for only a moment, illuminating the desert and the slender figure of a woman walking without direction, but with determination, clutching a small bag in her hands. It seemed the world was against her. The distant horizons were frightening, and every sound echoed hollowly. Behind her lay a past that promised only disappointment. Ahead was only the unknown, and the possibility of meeting a man who would become her anchor in the storm, though she did not yet know his name.
The storm hit without warning. Sand whipped across the plains, stinging the eyes and cutting at the skin. Every breath was a struggle. Every step sank into the loose, shifting earth. Landon Cross stood at the threshold of his ranch house, watching the wind claw at the landscape. He knew that out here, no one survived long, neither man nor beast. The air was thick with grit, and the howl of the storm seemed to carry the voices of 1,000 distant, unseen dangers. The horizon was a blur, and movement appeared like a shadow caught in the tempest. Through the haze, he saw her, a woman, small and fragile against the vast fury of the desert, stumbling through the flying sand. Her dress clung to her frame in torn, damp folds. Her hair stuck to her face, tangled and plastered by the wind. Her hands clutched a small bundle like it was her only lifeline. Each step she took was uncertain, every movement slow, deliberate, driven by exhaustion and stubborn will. The storm threatened to sweep her away, yet she pressed forward, a living fragment of determination moving through the chaos. Landon moved swiftly but quietly, his boots barely making sound on the hard-packed floorboards as he reached for the door. He swung it open, bracing against the gusts, letting the wind push its fury around him before stepping aside to offer her sanctuary. The warmth inside struck her first, a wall against the chill and grit of the desert. The iron stove glowed, casting amber light that fought the shadows gathering in the corners of the room. Smoke curled in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of embers and dry wood, a strange comfort against the roar outside. She sank onto the nearest bench, shivering uncontrollably, the tremors running through her body like echoes of the storm. Landon moved past her, setting a heavy woolen blanket over her shoulders. She wrapped it around herself with fumbling fingers, shivering through the folds until the first color returned to her cheeks. The dryness and cold of the desert had leached the warmth from her skin, but gradually, as she breathed in the scent of fire and pressed her hands to the heat radiating from the stove, her body began to settle. He did not speak. Words were unnecessary. Every gesture he made, adding logs to the fire, sliding a tin cup of water across the counter, adjusting the blanket to shield her shoulders, was a quiet promise. The storm raged against the wooden walls, pounding and rattling, but inside the small cabin, a fragile calm grew. Each careful movement, each measured breath was a signal that here, for the first time in hours, perhaps even days, she was not alone. Her fingers trembled as she tugged at her sodden dress, peeling it away slowly. The cloth stuck to her skin, cold and heavy, but she endured, folding it into a corner where it would dry. Landon remained at a distance, watching, ensuring she had space to regain control over her body and her fear. The room felt alive with their quiet coordination, the sound of her movements against the bench, the scrape of the fabric, the subtle shift of her weight on the floorboards. The wind continued to batter the cabin, yet within, trust began to take root.
Hours passed with only small routines to fill the silence. Water was fetched, the fire stoked, and blankets straightened. She moved through the cabin carefully, mindful of the space, yet confident enough to make herself useful.
Each motion spoke of resilience, and he observed it, quiet and restrained, allowing her presence to settle naturally alongside his own. There were no words of comfort. There was only the assurance of protection and the steady rhythm of shared survival. Outside, the storm screamed and clawed at the earth. Inside, the two of them existed in a fragile equilibrium, bound not by conversation, but by the simple acts of care. He watched as she began to adjust to the warmth, her shivering slowing, her breaths deepening. The wind struck again, rattling the windows, and she flinched slightly. He moved without hesitation, sliding closer to shield her from the draft, pressing a hand lightly to the edge of the blanket to secure it. It was an unspoken declaration, a silent anchoring in a night that threatened to swallow them both. The room grew heavier with dusk, shadows stretching across the floor as the fire cast long, trembling shapes on the walls. She shifted closer to the stove, resting her hands near the heat, and Landon sat nearby, tending the flames with careful precision. Every action was deliberate, every glance measured. The storm could rage outside, but here, in the quiet, she was learning the rhythm of survival, and he was learning the weight of responsibility. By the time the first hints of dawn slipped through the cracks in the roof, the storm had lessened, reduced to a lingering roar in the distance. Sand still swirled across the open land, but inside the air was warmer, heavier with the scent of burned wood and sweat, with the subtle, unmistakable presence of trust forming between them. She had survived the night, and in the act of enduring, a connection had been forged. It was small, fragile, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. They moved in tandem without acknowledging it, stacking logs, adjusting blankets, tending the small stove that held the heart of the cabin together. Each act was a wordless conversation, a promise that in this chaos, safety could exist. As the day broke over the desert, Landon watched her from across the room, noting the steadiness returning to her movements, the soft rise and fall of her chest. In the wake of the storm, something fragile but real had begun to grow.
Days passed with steady rhythm. Evelyn adapted to life on the ranch, rising early to tend the animals, preparing simple meals, and keeping the house in order. Each morning presented new challenges, from gathering eggs before the sun fully rose to filling water troughs for the horses and cattle. Landon moved beside her silently, showing subtle techniques, allowing her to make mistakes, correcting them without reprimand, and never letting her feel alone in the work. He watched her hands learn the proper movements, the careful attention she gave to each task, and he noticed how her confidence grew, quiet and deliberate with every passing day. Nights brought cold that seeped into the bones, but the small cabin offered warmth, not just from the stove, but from their shared presence. They slept in the same room, bodies pressed for heat, and the silence between them carried a comfort neither had expected. Words were unnecessary. In the quiet, trust built itself in small, almost imperceptible ways. Evelyn's breathing slowed beside him, no longer sharp with fear or exhaustion, and Landon saw her eyes soften, no longer wary or anxious. The walls of caution she carried began to crumble, replaced by a tentative ease that he recognized and respected. Daily tasks became a choreography of quiet understanding. They worked together without conversation, each motion a signal, stacking firewood, scrubbing the kitchen floor, tending to the horses, cleaning rifles, or repairing fences. A glance or a nod conveyed what words could not, and small touches, a hand brushing a sleeve aside, the passing of a cup of water, the adjustment of a blanket, spoke volumes. Through these ordinary, repetitive acts, their bond deepened. It was not the grand declarations of emotion that built their connection, but the accumulation of shared effort and silent attention, a growing certainty that in each other they had found steadiness amid the vast, unpredictable desert.
The rhythm of ranch life, paired with the quiet of evenings by the stove, allowed their trust to solidify. Evelyn learned to anticipate Landon's movements, and he learned the subtle ways she adapted, how her focus sharpened when she cared for an animal, or how her fingers lingered over a tool to steady it. In the small routines, they discovered a world where safety and partnership existed in unspoken forms. With each day and night, Evelyn's fear receded and Landon's watchful eyes softened, acknowledging the quiet, patient strength that had begun to take root between them. As spring edged into the desert, new trials emerged with an unrelenting force. One of the horses fell ill, its flank sweating and ribs showing beneath a coat dulled by dust. Part of the herd wandered too close to the jagged edges of the dry arroyo, threatening injury or loss. Evelyn insisted on riding out with Landon, refusing to remain sheltered while the work called for both hands and careful judgment. The desert greeted them with its raw and unforgiving ways. The ground cracked into hard, uneven ridges, stones sharp beneath boots, and the sun that baked the air until each breath felt like fire. The wind blew hot, stirring sand and dust into swirling clouds, making every step a test of endurance and focus. Evelyn learned quickly to anticipate the animal's movements, to steady herself on loose ground, and to act without hesitation. She mirrored Landon's motions as he led the horses across uneven terrain, adjusting bridles and checking hooves with precise hands. Every shift of weight, every glance, and every careful step was observed, corrected, and repeated until the motions became instinctive. She carried water in leather pouches, set ropes and tarps, and lifted supplies with muscles she hadn't known she possessed. The desert demanded both vigilance and patience, and through its harshness, she discovered strength that was not just physical, but anchored in calm determination. Landon watched her silently, noting how her movements had become deliberate and sure, how her eyes scanned the horizon with awareness and care. He saw her strength emerging not as a show of defiance, but as quiet resilience, and with each passing hour, he felt the subtle, unspoken bond between them deepen. In the heat and the grit, they moved together almost without thought, understanding the rhythm of work and the language of survival that needed no words. The desert pressed against them from all sides, but in the shared struggle, they found an odd intimacy, a reliance on each other that neither could have anticipated. Their journey back to the ranch was quieter, slower, yet heavy with meaning. Dust caked their hair and clothes, sweat darkened the fabric of their shirts, and their boots bore the marks of countless steps across harsh soil. Despite exhaustion, Evelyn carried herself with a newfound assurance, the earlier fragility replaced by deliberate, steady movements. Landon observed her, the corners of his mouth lifting in a small, rare smile, the kind that comes when admiration mixes with relief. He recognized her not as a guest in his life, but as a partner, capable and dependable, someone who had endured what he knew the land could throw at a person and had emerged not broken, but stronger. The desert had tested more than their skill or endurance. It had revealed patience, focus, and the subtle art of trust. Every shared task, from guiding the herd to tending the sick horse, had built a silent connection, a rhythm of cooperation that strengthened their bond. Evelyn's confidence now radiated quietly but unmistakably, a reflection of what they had faced together. Landon felt the weight of the unspoken understanding that had grown between them, a recognition that these trials were shaping not only their survival, but the foundation of a partnership forged under relentless sun, scorching wind, and the unforgiving expanse of the desert. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun hung low, casting long shadows across the land. Their boots crunched against the hard earth, their breaths ragged but steady. Evelyn paused for a moment, looking out over the familiar terrain with a sense of ownership, of belonging, of accomplishment earned through sweat and determination. Landon walked beside her, silent but present, feeling the subtle shift in their dynamic, the quiet acknowledgement that she was no longer just a visitor in his life, but a companion who had proven herself capable of weathering storms, both literal and metaphorical. In that moment, the desert behind them seemed less threatening, transformed by the hours they had endured together into a place that had shaped, strengthened, and united them. A figure from Evelyn's past arrived unexpectedly, cutting across the quiet expanse of the ranch like a shadow. He came with the sheriff and a pair of hired men, their horses stamping the dust and sun-bleached grass as they approached. The presence of outsiders brought a tension that seemed to twist the air itself. Landon stepped onto the porch, his stance rigid but calm, a silent assertion that no claim from the past would be honored here. He made no threats, no moves toward confrontation beyond his unwavering posture. The desert wind carried dust and the sharp scent of anticipation as he stood firm between Evelyn and those who sought to disrupt her newfound life. Evelyn felt the weight of fear as it pressed into her chest, a new and sharp awareness that danger could arrive unannounced and without mercy. She realized that strength was not measured in hands or weapons alone, but in the quiet courage to face what was coming, to stand upright and steady in the face of intimidation. Each heartbeat marked her growing understanding that survival meant more than avoiding harm. It meant knowing she had the right to remain, the right to choose, the right to define the life she had begun to build. Landon's presence was steady, a shield that extended without words, reinforcing boundaries with a quiet, immovable authority. The community watched from a distance, the tension rippling through neighbors and ranchers alike. Some were drawn to support, stepping forward subtly with nods or careful offers of assistance. Others held back, unsure of the storm gathering in the desert heat, wary of being caught in a conflict that might turn violent. Evelyn observed the reactions around her and understood that trust and courage were contagious, that steadfastness inspired more than mere loyalty. It encouraged belief in what was right, in the boundaries she and Landon had claimed. Landon's presence was steady, a shield that extended without words, reinforcing boundaries with a quiet, immovable authority. Within the walls of the cabin, every glance, every step taken by Evelyn carried meaning. She felt herself shifting from someone led by circumstance to someone capable of action. Tasks she had once undertaken cautiously now bore the imprint of deliberate intent, whether arranging supplies, tending animals, or simply holding herself with the quiet authority of someone who would not be coerced. Landon moved alongside her with unobtrusive presence, reinforcing her sense of control, while allowing her the dignity of facing the challenge without unnecessary interference. The shadow from her past lingered, pressing outward like the desert heat, but it met with the resilience forged by days in sun and sand, by nights spent near the warmth of fire and steady breath. Evelyn learned the subtle art of standing firm, balancing caution with assertiveness, and understanding that the trust and loyalty between herself and Landon formed a bond far stronger than intimidation or threats. Every gesture they shared, from securing the porch to checking the horses, spoke of an unspoken alliance, a shared understanding that neither would yield easily. Time moved slowly under the harsh sun as the visitors measured the strength of their resolve. Evelyn realized that fear could be transformed into purpose, that past shadows could be confronted without surrendering the present. She saw the community's eyes, the cautious recognition that her life was no longer dictated by distant promises or obligations she had once felt powerless to defy. The lessons of endurance, patience, and steady resolve became her armor, a shield that no amount of coercion could penetrate. As the visitors finally departed, tension lingering in the dust-swollen air, Evelyn felt the release of a weight she hadn't fully recognized until it lifted. The experience had tested her courage and her ability to act, revealing depths of resilience she had not known existed. Landon remained beside her, quiet and steady, a constant reminder that strength was found not in isolation but in partnership, in the shared vigilance and trust that bound them together. The desert settled back into its stillness, the air cooling with the approach of evening, but a new understanding lingered between them, a recognition that they had faced a threat together, that they had endured, and that nothing from the past could reclaim what they were building here. Evelyn's eyes scanned the horizon as the shadows lengthened, absorbing the stillness, feeling the firm ground beneath her boots, the warmth of Landon close by. She understood that her life was now truly hers, shaped by choice and courage, guarded by a silent but unbreakable bond. The trials of the past could not undo the life she had forged. The trust and steadfastness between them had become a shield, invisible but strong, holding them safe in a world that could shift like the desert wind, and affirming that together they could endure whatever came next. Evelyn moved through the morning light with a quiet determination that had grown from weeks of relentless work and endurance. She gathered the scattered papers, letters, and accounts that proved her right to remain on the ranch, assembling them with care and precision. Each document, each signature, was a testament not only to her independence, but to the courage she had nurtured in herself. Neighbors watched from a distance, their curiosity tempered by respect, as they saw her face set with resolve, her hands steady, her posture upright. They had witnessed her labor, her patience, and the quiet strength that had carried her through the storms of both desert and circumstance. Landon observed her closely, his eyes noting the subtle changes in her demeanor. There was a calm confidence now, a steadiness that mirrored his own, yet distinct in its own right. He saw how the weight of past fears had lifted, replaced by an inner certainty that she could endure, could protect herself, and could stand as his equal. Every gesture she made, whether tending to the animals, stacking firewood, or organizing the ranch accounts, carried a sense of deliberate purpose. The way she moved through her tasks revealed a harmony between capability and intention, a reflection of the bond forming between them, unspoken but palpable. The long days tested their endurance. Heat from the desert sun, dust stirred by the wind, and the endless demands of the ranch could have worn down anyone. Yet Evelyn met each challenge without complaint, her energy measured, her focus unbroken. Landon worked beside her, each movement complementary to the others, without need for instruction or correction. They had learned to anticipate each other's actions, to read the silent language that had grown between them. The rhythm of shared labor became a rhythm of trust, each act reinforcing the invisible threads that bound them together. Evenings brought a different kind of closeness. The air cooled, the desert stretching wide and quiet under a pale sky, and they would sit near the fire, letting the exhaustion of the day settle into the warmth between them. Silence was no longer empty, it was a language in itself. A brush of a hand while passing the water bucket, a glance over a pile of papers, a shared pause to watch the sun sink behind distant mesas, all carried meaning. They understood that love was not always declared in words, but forged in steadfast presence, in the continuity of care and attention, in the quiet assurance of safety and respect. The trials they had faced together, the storms, the threats, the relentless desert, had transformed them. Evelyn had learned that strength could be measured in persistence, in courage taken slowly but consistently, in the willingness to remain steady when the world pressed hard against one's will. Landon had recognized in her not just survival, but an active mastery over circumstance, a resilience that made her an equal in every sense. Together, they had navigated fear, uncertainty, and exhaustion, and in doing so had cultivated a partnership both unbreakable and tender. Each day brought small confirmations of their bond. Evelyn's independent actions were no longer solitary. They were part of a shared life, interwoven with Landon's own. Every decision she made, from tending to the cattle to maintaining the cabin, carried his quiet support, and in return, his presence affirmed her choices, making her strength visible to both themselves and the world around them. They had become a team, forged in struggle, steady in their understanding of one another, and resilient in the face of the world beyond their doors. The desert, the relentless wind, and the shadows of past threats had become a part of their shared narrative. These elements, once sources of fear, were now markers of endurance, symbols of what they had endured and survived together. Every storm weathered, every long day of labor, every night spent in quiet companionship had built something permanent. The bond between them was no longer tentative or fragile. It was a certainty, a promise born not from words alone, but from shared experience and unwavering trust. As the sun dipped low, casting long, amber shadows across the desert floor, Evelyn paused to take in the landscape, feeling its vastness mirrored in the expanse of possibility before her. She understood, with a clarity that only came from trial and perseverance, that she had claimed her place, not just on the land, but beside Landon, as an equal, as a partner. Every storm endured, every challenge faced together had solidified what had once been tentative trust into a firm foundation of respect, admiration, and quiet love. The desert was no longer merely a place of survival. It was the backdrop of their shared life, a canvas for a bond both steadfast and enduring.
Night fell gently over the ranch, stars piercing the darkening sky. Evelyn and Landon moved through the tasks of closing the day with a synchronized calm, each aware of the other's presence, each reinforced by the knowledge that together they could face whatever came next. The ranch was not just a place of work, it was the stage on which they had proved their resilience, the ground upon which their partnership had solidified. And in the stillness of the desert night, their hearts carried a quiet, undeniable understanding that the trials they had endured together had shaped something lasting, unshakable, and beautiful. They had survived the pressures of the past, weathered the harshness of the desert, and withstood the challenges that had sought to divide them. In doing so, they had created a life that neither could face alone, but that they could navigate together, fortified by trust, tempered by shared experience, and enriched by the subtle, persistent growth of love. In the rhythm of their daily lives, in the certainty of their shared resolve, they discovered the permanence of their bond, the quiet triumph of connection forged in the crucible of adversity, and the transformative power of standing together. Subscribe to Dust and Devotion Tales to follow the continuing journey of Evelyn and Landon and witness how love, trust, and endurance shape lives in the untamed landscapes of the American West.
The spring sun spread warmth across the New Mexico plains, coaxing the first green shoots from the soil and setting small wildflowers in bloom. The ranch, once battered by storms and uncertainty, had been restored to a place of life and stability. Evelyn moved among the newly repaired fences and tidy barns with a quiet pride, noting how each corner of the property reflected months of labor, care, and shared perseverance. Landon worked alongside her, his movements steady and precise, each action a testament to the endurance and partnership they had forged together. The land itself seemed to acknowledge their presence, no longer harsh or threatening, but welcoming, softened by the season's gentle light and the scent of renewal. Every morning, Evelyn and Landon followed a rhythm born of shared experience. Feeding the animals, tending to crops, stacking firewood, and maintaining the cabins were no longer chores, but affirmations of their life together. Tasks flowed seamlessly between them, guided by unspoken understanding, each glance and gesture carrying the weight of trust and familiarity. The routines of the ranch became a quiet language, a dialogue of presence and reliability that needed no words, where every motion reinforced the foundation they had built: strength, respect, and an enduring sense of belonging. The community that had once watched them with suspicion now regarded them with quiet respect. Neighbors acknowledged their skill, resilience, and integrity through gestures small and meaningful: a borrowed tool returned carefully, a nod across a fence, an offer of help during a particularly hot afternoon. Evelyn saw herself reflected in their recognition, no longer a visitor or a stranger to the desert, but a figure who had claimed her place not through force or fear, but through steadfastness, courage, and the quiet demonstration of her capability. Landon noticed the same: the way she had grown into a partner equal in every sense, her confidence and competence complementing his own, their presence together stabilizing both the land and those around them. Evenings became a sanctuary where the world's hardships seemed to fade. They would move through the chores of closing the day, tending fires and preparing meals with a calm precision, the soft creak of floorboards or the warm glow of lamplight creating a comforting rhythm. They shared the silence now freely, letting it stretch between them as naturally as the horizon stretched across the plains. A simple touch, a hand resting on a shoulder, a quiet look over simmering coffee, each moment carried meaning, solidifying the emotional bond that had grown through shared labor, survival, and trust. Their connection no longer needed words. It was lived, practiced, and fully present.
Nights on the ranch took on a gentle, almost sacred quality. Stars sparkled in a clear desert sky, each one mirrored in the calm certainty of their hearts. Evelyn rested against Landon, the softness of the blanket around them and the steady warmth of his presence offering comfort and reassurance. The trials of storms, threats, and harsh landscapes seemed distant now, reduced to memories that had shaped them but no longer held sway. Their hands intertwined, hearts beating in quiet synchrony, each pulse a reminder of the choice they had made to remain together, not out of necessity, but out of recognition of the life they had created, of the bond strengthened through every hardship faced side by side. They moved through the day-to-day with a sense of permanence and quiet celebration. Every repaired fence, every freshly tended garden bed, every satisfied animal reflected the diligence and care that had defined their journey. Landon, watching Evelyn work, recognized the depth of her transformation. She had become not only a partner, but a foundation, a presence that grounded him as much as he grounded her. They had chosen each other freely, their lives intertwined not by circumstance alone, but by mutual respect, shared trials, and an understanding that love was built through action as much as feeling. The plains stretched endlessly beyond the ranch, but within its boundaries lay a home crafted by hands that had endured and hearts that had committed. The seasons promised cycles of growth, hardship, and renewal, yet the certainty between Evelyn and Landon remained steadfast. The past, with its storms and threats, had shaped them, but it no longer held them. They faced the future together, prepared for whatever challenges might arrive, secure in the knowledge that their bond was unbreakable, formed through shared labor, quiet perseverance, and unwavering trust. Night fully settled over the desert, the hush of twilight wrapping the ranch in serenity. Evelyn and Landon sat together, limbs lightly touching, eyes meeting with unspoken understanding. The world outside could shift and roar, but inside, in the life they had built, there was stability, safety, and love. The ranch was more than land. It was the testament to what they had endured and what they had chosen to protect and nurture. Their home was no longer a shelter from the storm. It was a living symbol of resilience, partnership, and devotion. Their hands stayed intertwined as darkness enveloped the plains, hearts steady and aligned. Every storm faced, every hardship endured, every moment of shared effort had led to this quiet certainty. The choice to remain together had been theirs to make, fully aware and entirely free. and it had been made. A new chapter of their life had begun, one marked not by fear or survival alone, but by a deliberate, shared decision to build, nurture, and cherish what they had created together. Subscribe to Dust and Devotion Tales to continue following Evelyn and Landon, witnessing how love, endurance, and shared courage shape life and connection in the untamed landscapes of the American West.